Everybody, Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio, every Wednesday, 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network, streaming live on YouTube as well as Twitch. And, of course, you can watch the show on YouTube and Twitch every Wednesday as well, twitch.tv/F4W video. And you can use your Amazon Prime to get a Twitch subscription free, as well as video. F4WOnline.com. That is our YouTube channel. Click subscribe. We have got an exciting show today. If you listen to Wrestling Observer Live, or attempted to, at noon Pacific today, it was a disaster. It is time to barrel on through and turn that ship around with Philip J. Center, Ph.D., who is our guest here today. And he has written a great book, The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons. We had been talking on this show about the idea that perhaps, well, there's a lot of different ideas. Some people believe perhaps humanity is so old that, in fact, it's not 300,000 years. Perhaps long, long ago, humans and dinosaurs coexisted. Perhaps dinosaurs somewhere still exist to this day. And I said, you know what? I need to get somebody on the show that's going to talk about dinosaurs and humans and all of this. And so we have got Philip J. Center on the program here today. And he'll talk about a lot of other stuff as well. There are mentions of Leviathan in the Bible. We've been talking about Noah's Ark, and a lot of this actually ties into some people's belief that humanity and dinosaurs coexisted, and so we'll talk all about that here today. It's going to be a very fun show. It's a fun book. You can check it out on Amazon.com. The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons. Philip J. Center after the break. Wrestling is not to this show. This is After Dark Radio on Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Alvarez here, After Dark Radio, every Wednesday, 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Very happy today to be joined by our special guest. Philip Center is joining us here today as I mute that feed right there. Philip, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. How about you, Brian?
I've had a rough day, I'm not going to lie. But you know what? We're going to barrel on through here.
Oh, you want to talk about it?
No, actually, I don't. It was actually, I do another show, and I spent a half hour talking about it on that show. So I thought it was over when that show ended,
okay.
But then, turns out it hadn't ended. But anyway, I'm very excited to have you on the show today.
Too bad.
I'll give you a little bit of background on this. So, this is After Dark Radio. We talk about all sorts of weird things. And I'm generally a skeptic about a lot of things. And I generally believe, when we talk about history, that, we pretty much largely know about the history of this planet. I do believe, and I think you would agree, that every now and then there's a new piece of evidence that maybe pushes back the dawn of humanity a little bit. But, the idea that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, I'm quite skeptical. And I like to read stories about people that claim Mokele Mbembe or this dinosaur in the Congo or the Loch Ness Monster or whatever. But in general, I'm quite skeptical. So, I had been asking, I need somebody to come on the show to discuss this topic. And, our producer, Andrew, contacted you. And at first, I didn't know what side you were going to be on, okay? But I was like, all right, let's see how this goes. So I saw that you had the book, which is The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons, and I bought it, and I'm most of the way through. I think this book is awesome, and I think that we're largely very much on the same page. But I learned a lot.
Ah, sounds good.
I learned a lot reading this book, and I got a lot of questions for you. So...
All right.
I think at the beginning, let's just have you tell us a little bit about the book, and then we'll get going.
Sure. Well, this whole thing started when a student of mine who was a senior and a biology major mentioned in class, he said, quote, I think evolution is a hoax, unquote. And I couldn't believe it that someone who's a senior in college and a biology major had not been introduced to the evidence that evolution exists. So I started researching what the other side is saying, and it was just so interesting what they're saying about dinosaurs. Ridiculous, but interesting. And after a while, it seemed book-worthy. And this book, the real story of dinosaurs and dragons, just kind of flowed once I started writing it. I sought to chronicle the history of the dragon concept through the ages, and then how it got twisted in the hands of Answers in Genesis and so forth into something really weird. And the whole history of that is just fascinating, how they've taken the dinosaur and dragon concepts, which are completely different things, conflated them, and try to make a case that they're actually the same thing, said two different ways. And the mental gymnastics that it takes to do that is amazing to watch. It's got a choreography to it that's a thing of beauty. So I figured I should write this down and tell the story of this concept and its misconceptions, and because it's so entertaining, people might actually enjoy reading it.
Well, I may have to steal that line that you had as a catchphrase for this show: ridiculous but interesting. That is that is why I love all of this. Now, dragons and dinosaurs, okay? Mm-hmm. The first thing that really got me about the book was I always had this idea in my head that the reason that we had this idea of dragons was because thousands of years ago, somebody dug up a dinosaur skeleton and, couldn't figure out what it was, and they created this idea of dragons. I hadn't read that anywhere. It's just I figured that made sense. But in reading your book, that's really not what happened at all. And I was astounded to read that the modern idea of what a dragon is, a fire-breathing dinosaur-like thing with wings and everything else, that wasn't even a thing until like the Middle Ages. Like all of the things
correct.
you read in history about dragons, they were never what we envision a dragon as being. So tell us what the dragon originally was.
I'll start with the very first sentence in the book. In the beginning, the dragon had no legs. And to elaborate on that, it was the Greeks who came up with the word dragon. They spelled it with a K or a kappa instead of a G, so it was a drakon back then. But to the ancient Greeks, it meant serpent. And there were two different words for snake: ophis, which is just the run-of-the-mill, everyday usage word for it, and then drakon when you wanted to be poetic or formal. So kind of like in English we say snake and serpent, this is ophis and drakon in Greek. So when the Greeks talked about a dragon, they were talking about a snake in a poetic context or in a formal context, for example, the context of myth. And that sort of thing continued into the Roman period when the Romans had their ordinary words for snake, anguis and serpens, and then their formal word for snakes was derived from the Greek drakon. They used draco. And here's the cool thing. Whenever a drakon in Greek myth or a draco in Roman myth is depicted on a vase or in a frieze or in some artwork, it's always shown as a snake. And this is how we know what the word means. The artists were telling us a dragon is a snake. And this continued until the late part of the early Middle Ages. And at that point, for no apparent reason, artists start putting feathered wings on the dragons in art and a pair of hind limbs. So the midsection of the dragon has turned into a bird, but it's still got a snake's coily tail. And for some reason on the front end, now they're adding ears and a dog-like head. So it's part mammal in front, part bird in the middle, but still a snake on the end, still a snake on the backside.
And we don't know why they did this?
No, we don't know for sure. There are some hypotheses that have been advanced, and I think two are particularly plausible. There's one hypothesis by a dragon expert by the name of Daniel Ogden, who has published book after book on dragons. And if you love dragons, you got to check out some of his books on the subject. He covers kind of the evolution of the dragon through history, and in my book only does that for chapter 1, basically. So it's kind of a condensed version of all that. But his hypothesis was that it was based on the kitos, which is a Greek way of saying sea monster, because when the ancient Greeks and Romans would depict a sea monster, they would put a mammalian head on it and one pair of limbs, and sometimes a tiny little pair of wings, and usually the tail was coiling. And this is what we see in the dragons that are first starting to be something other than a snake in the Middle Ages. They've got the wings, except instead of a little pair, it's a big, full-on pair of bird wings. And it's the mammalian head. We still got the coily tail. We got the pair of legs. So it kind of makes sense to me. But I think something else might have been going on. So the second hypothesis is mine, and it hasn't yet appeared in print.
Well,
so
actually, this is a good time. This is a
here.
good time to take a commercial. We'll come back and get your hypothesis on why the image
Sounds
of the
good.
dragon changed. That'll be up after the break, everybody. Back in a moment. After Dark Radio Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. We are joined here today by Philip J. Center, author of The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons. And before the break, we were talking about how in the Middle Ages, the look of a dragon drastically changed to essentially what I remember seeing in all those old maps. You know, you'd see those old maps, and then, you know, this area of the world, there would be like some weird-looking sea serpent coming out of the water, and it was exactly as you described. Mammal head and wings, and then a weird curly tail. So, yeah, fascinating. What is your hypothesis on why this changed?
I think it is quite possible that this is derived from Anglo-Saxon composite animals, because I've noticed in Anglo-Saxon art that there's very often little birds with mammal heads, and from time to time they will be given mammal paws for feet as well, which is what we see in the earliest dragons that are elaborated and no longer snakes. And what's different from these Anglo-Saxon beasts, and really the only major point of difference between them and the dragons that come next in art in the following centuries, is the tail. And the Anglo-Saxon art, the tail is coily, but it's often multi-branched and ends in leaves and flowers and things. So the artists were really getting creative, putting things together. And we end up seeing the same thing, but with a serpent's tail in the 9th and 10th centuries, in context where you know it's a dragon, like Saint Michael the Archangel with his spear spearing something. You know it's going to be the dragon, Satan, and it's that sort of a creature with the snake's tail, or this or that saint, like Saint George and so forth, spearing a dragon, and it'll be that sort of a thing. It'll be, you know, the mammal head and the bird-like midsection, but with mammal paws, and then the snake-like tail. So since the tail really the only point of departure between the two, I figure there's an evolution here, which may have been influenced by the Ketos too, the Greek and Roman sea monster. It's not, which is Daniel Ogden's hypothesis. It's possible that all these things influenced each other. So the one hypothesis is not necessarily exclusive relative to the rest. Kind of hard to tell without getting into a medieval artist's head, which would take some really intense technology.
Well, that would be ridiculous but interesting, is what that would be.
Yes,
my new favorite line. Now, another thing that I learned that kind of ties in all of this, you know, you mentioned this all started when somebody in one of your classes was skeptical of the entire concept of evolution. And, you know...
Yes, that's right.
I think when most people think about the theory of evolution, they think of Charles Darwin. But in the book, you note that, you know, evolution had been a theory long before Darwin due to, you know, as people were starting to dig things up and learning about the different stratas, you know, they learned that, like, the farther down you go, you know, they could see the changes based on, you know, what they dug up in what layer of Earth, essentially. And they could see that things seemed to be changing. So there was like an understanding of evolution in certain circles before Charles Darwin wrote his book, correct?
That's correct. So for the first half of the 19th century, there's book after book coming out saying that the fossil sequence supports an idea of evolution. And Darwin's book on the origin of species didn't come out till 1859, which is the beginning of the second half of that century. But he had already been preceded by several authors who noted that there are no two slices of ancient time with the same fauna. And the closer we get to the present time, the more the organisms, the more the animals and plants resemble their present-day counterparts. So obviously they're changing over time. So yeah, this is something that Darwin piggybacked on, but he didn't invent it.
And it was also fascinating to read that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I mean, we're talking like 150 years ago, it was quite generally accepted that, yes, these dinosaurs lived a long, long time ago, way before humans existed, and it actually wasn't until like the late 1900s, early 2000s that we started to get the theories that maybe dinosaurs and humans coexisted. It's almost like you would think that it would go the other way. Like, back when we didn't know anything, we had this conclusion, and then as the more we learned, the more we figure this out. But in fact, it's gone in the reverse direction. 150 years ago, there was no question that we did not intermingle with dinosaurs. But, in the last 25 years, 50 years, now people are starting to question this, and there's not like new evidence coming out to prove it. They're just, it's baffling to me.
Right. Yeah. And I feel the same way. It is a bit baffling. And, there has been an undercurrent of maybe the humans and dinosaurs did coexist. Even there was a tiny, tiny little bit of that in the 19th century. But yeah, it did not explode in popularity until the latter half of the 20th century. And now it's spreading like wildfire. And one of the brilliant things that the anti-evolution movement has done is to pick up on the superficial resemblance between dinosaurs and the later post-medieval dragon depictions. And they've come up with the idea that, maybe dragon legends had their origin in human encounters with dinosaurs. But what they failed to take into account is that dragons didn't become dinosaur-like in the art until the Renaissance and later. And before that, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the dragon concept, that they're just snakes. And you would expect the reverse to be the case. If humans had encountered dinosaurs in ancient days, you'd expect their depictions of dinosaur/dragon to actually look like a dinosaur, wouldn't you? And then as they hunt the dinosaurs/dragons to extinction and the animals become less and less familiar, then they should look less and less realistic, less and less like dinosaurs as the centuries go by in the art. And yet that is not the case. We see the reverse happening in the art. So the anti-evolution hypothesis regarding dinosaurs and dragons was actually falsified by art historians before it was ever formulated by Answers in Genesis and company.
So you mentioned Genesis, and really would you say that the explosion of the idea that in fact dinosaurs and humans coexisted began with the Genesis flood book in the 60s?
I think so, yeah. It was probably simmering under the surface before then, but it wasn't until one line in a footnote in that book, The Genesis Flood, which published in the 1960s, that it was put into print explicitly. And then that footnote exploded into book after book in the 1970s and the 80s and the 90s and now. And the elaboration on that idea that dragon legends were based on human encounters with dinosaurs just really took off and got bizarre, and even some mechanisms for dinosaurian proposed.
Yes.
None of them actually work. They all either violate physics or biology, but it's such a fun rabbit hole to go down to. I devoted a whole chapter to it in the book, how we know that these fire-breathing mechanisms wouldn't work. And, as you go through, you learn about how rocket fuel works and other very cool things, carnival fire eaters and so forth. I tell you, learning about this stuff so I could write about it was a blast.
So tell us about the Genesis flood. What was the book about?
This was a book about geology, except it was not written by geologists. It was the goal was to misinterpret every aspect of sedimentary geology as evidence that the Genesis flood happened worldwide. and they accomplished that goal brilliantly. The two authors, they took just about every aspect of geology you can imagine and blamed it on the Genesis flood. And an actual geologist reading the book would laugh their way through it, because it makes no sense. But if you don't have a geological education, which most of the reading public doesn't have, because let's face it, how many of us have taken a geology class in college? Very few. The book sounds like it makes sense if you don't know your stuff, but if you do, it's ridiculous but interesting.
So what was the footnote that referenced dinosaurs?
I don't remember the quote off the top of my head verbatim, but on one page, one footnote, it just mentions that humans and dinosaurs may have encountered each other after the flood and before dinosaurs finally went extinct, and that dragon legends might be based on this.
We've been, reading newspaper articles here and there. And when we come back from the break, there have been a lot of articles lately about, yes, Noah's Ark. And I know you've got some stuff to say about that. After the break, everybody. After Dark Radio Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Back at the show, Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Philip Center is our guest today. The Real Stories of Dinosaurs and Dragons, which also talks a lot about claims that are backed up by what is written in the Bible. Of course, you know, the first 5 books of the Bible, a lot of origin stories and such. And as you point out in your book, I mean, there are people that want to believe that the Bible is legitimate historical record. And, of course, there are others who believe that there are portions of it that are legitimate historical record. Other portions of it are stories, allegories. And you know that there are portions of the Bible that state that you should not necessarily take the first 5 books of that Bible as historical fact, correct?
That's correct. To elaborate on that a little bit, Scripture itself warns us against taking these first 5 books as a historical record. And let me clear up one misconception, too. That we talk of them as 5 books, but they're 5 volumes of one book, the Pentateuch, the Torah. And it was so big that it took 5 scrolls to hold it, which is what Pentateuch means, 5 scrolls. So we treat it as 5 books today. And in the past, it was treated as one book. And Psalm 78:2 has a lot to say about that one book, or maybe just a little to say, but with a lot packed into that little. It calls the story a mashal and chidot, which is usually translated in English as parables and dark sayings, which the 2 Hebrew words don't really have English equivalents, but that's a pretty good approximation. And the psalm goes on to recap the Exodus and things that happen after that, all the way up to the Israelites' entry into the Promised Land. And it prefaces it in verse 2 by saying, hey, what you're about to hear is mashal and chidot. In other words, these are stories that say one thing but mean another. In other words, there's an underlying meaning, like a parable. When Jesus told a parable, like the Good Samaritan, he wasn't saying there was actually a guy who got attacked by robbers and a priest passed by and a Samaritan helped him out. No, he was telling a story with some symbolic meaning. He was giving what the Hebrews would call a mashal. And the psalmist is saying that the Pentateuch, this is also a mashal, just a really big one. So it's warning us there. And then there are other places as well. If you read the last chapter of the book, The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons, you'll get a nice long list of the other passages in the Old Testament and the New Testament that treat the Pentateuch as something other than history, treat it as a symbolic expression of spiritual truths. So, long story short, it's a series of theology lessons, not history lessons.
Now,
and, archaeology backs us up on this, and in case after case, there's stuff that happens in the Pentateuch that is contradicted by archaeological evidence, but that's okay. The book wasn't meant as history; it was meant as theology.
Now, you know, there's stories. I mean, we've talked not only on this show about, you know, is there's always these stories about they've discovered the location of Noah's Ark, etc. But, you know, we've also talked with other people about the Ark of the Covenant, for example. Is that still housed in Ethiopia, et cetera, et cetera? And, you know, I've always, you know, a lot of these stories, yes. I mean, if we think about the story of Noah's Ark, I mean, the idea that, I mean, just mathematically, you're going to get one pair of every animal species in the whole world and put it on one boat because there was a flood that covered the whole entire earth. Seems like that's probably not a historical fact, okay? But, you know, sometimes I think, okay, well, you know, perhaps there was localized flooding somewhere and this guy did build a boat and, you know, they tell this story over thousands of years verbally, you know, things get changed, a game of telephone, and maybe the story as it was written certainly did not happen that way, but perhaps there was something that occurred, and that became, because, it doesn't matter where your religion, culture, whatever. There are flood stories in cultures all over the world, and that doesn't mean that there was one giant flood, that there's localized flooding here, there, whatever. It seems like some of these stories, maybe there is a historical basis to it, and it has been blown up in the retelling. So then we get to the idea, well...
Yeah, you got a point there.
Yeah, but when it comes to Noah's Ark, all these stories that they've found something that roughly the same length, width, the cubits, etc., in the mountains of Ararat, you're of the impression that, like, this is there's nothing there.
There's something there, but it's not an ark. It's a hill. It is a boat-shaped hill. And Turkish geologists have already studied the thing and have written on it extensively in Turkish, which unfortunately makes it kind of inaccessible to most of us. But hey, Google Translate is a beautiful thing. And if you spend your time typing a little bit, typing the Turkish in and seeing the English equivalent, what you find is that this is a hill that's made mostly of limestone. It is shaped like a boat. That's just a coincidence. It's just the shape that you'd kind of expect from it having detached from the cliff where it detached, and they figured out what cliff it detached from, and then flowed down over the millennia to its present location through a process called earth flow, which, imagine a landslide. And now imagine that so slow that it goes on for millennia, and you can't tell from one year to the next that it's even happening, but it's happening. And that is how this boat-shaped hill, which is made of limestone, has moved from the limestone cliff from which it originally fell some time ago. And the cool thing about the boat-shaped hill, it's approximately the same dimensions in cubits as the ark is in Genesis.
Okay,
let me. A lot of people into thinking that it's the ark.
Yes. Now, let me ask you your opinion. Okay, we all have our opinion. So, this hill is very similar in length and width to what the Bible claims Noah's Ark was. Okay, so there's a million options, but here's the two I'll present you with. Which one do you think is more likely? Number one, the biblical story of Noah's Ark was based on, at some point somewhere, there was a massive, massive flooding event, and some dude made a big boat, rescued some people, and in the retelling over the years, ultimately it became the story of Noah's Ark and the Great Flood. Or do you believe there never was even a flood, and that at some point people saw this mountain that looked like a boat, they measured it, and they created the story solely from that observation? Because, what's the rainbow? Everybody made up stories about everything back in the day to explain things.
Right.
What do you think is more likely? The flood story is a memory of an actual, not worldwide, obviously, but an actual flooding event? Or do you believe that they saw that, they measured it, and that became the story to explain why that hill looks like a boat?
We're presenting,
because it is weird that it is the same, the same size.
Right. The truth might be maybe. Again, I don't have a hard and fast opinion on this. What I do is look at different possibilities and say, oh, okay, but I'm not going to latch onto one. I think it is quite possible that the story is based on flooding events because, let's face it, floods happen every year all over the globe. They're not an uncommon thing. Even catastrophic floods happen very commonly. So, why wouldn't that be in people's minds as they're weaving tales? And now, if we add that, hey, nearby, or a few miles away, there's this hill that's shaped like a boat, and here are its dimensions. Now let's add that into the story. Yeah, why couldn't it be that both things are correct as far as the origin story goes? So yeah, I don't know. You'd kind of have to have a time machine to really know the origin of
Yes.
of it. But yeah.
Well, here's something a little more current that ties into the dinosaurs and the dragons. So would you basically this idea that humans and dinosaurs coexisted? This meaning not there are dinosaurs around today, but that there were humans around a long time ago. Correct me if I'm wrong. This basically stems from this idea, probably starting from the Genesis flood book. But I guess you said this had been talked about earlier. That if you do the math and you take the Old Testament literally, the Earth is 6,000 years old, and thus it is impossible that dinosaurs and humans wouldn't have coexisted in the last 6,000 years. Is that basically how this dinosaurs and humans coexisting theory began?
Yes, that's the logic behind it, and I got to say I can see the logic. The logic makes sense, except for when you'd have to discount all the results of radiometric dating that we've collected since the early 1900s in order to really make it believable. But yeah, you can see the thought process there. Let me throw this in there too. I may be skeptical on the literal historicity of Noah's flood and the rest of the Pentateuch stories, but I am a man of faith. I'm a practicing Christian, and it's important for people to know that you can be a practicing Christian and a skeptic at the same time. And in fact, you can be a Bible-based skeptic by taking Psalm 78:2 as your reason, a Bible-based reason for doubting the veracity of these stories in the Pentateuch and taking them as theology lessons, not history lessons.
So those that believe that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, obviously the question would be, well, how come there's dinosaur fossils, but there's no human fossils from back then? And I guess the theory is that the dinosaurs ate them. I know that sounds preposterous, but that is the explanation, right?
According to one individual, yes, who wrote in the 1800s. Now, and this particular individual writer was not projecting dinosaurs forward in time, but projecting people backward in time.
Yes.
And saying that we lived in the Mesozoic, and the only reason you don't find our fossils back there is that none of the megalosauri, his word, would have allowed a corpse to rest in peace. So, I mean, his wording was just pretty good. His article makes a fun read. This particular fellow was making the argument that Megalosaurus and Iguanodon, which were the first two dinosaurs to be named, were Leviathan and Behemoth from the Book of Job.
Specifically,
and when he wrote his book, those were the only two dinosaurs that were known at the time. So,
wow.
I mean, yeah, the deep history of the dinosaurs plus people concept is truly fascinating.
I mean, we could do hours on this
ridiculous,
because
but interesting.
Yeah, the claim there have been human footprints found alongside dinosaur footprints. You discount that completely. Well, here, stand by. We're going to head to a break. We got to head to a break here. But when we come back, you guys, you want to know more about all of this? I got a book for you. So stand by. After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network, YouTube and Twitch. Philip J. Center is our guest today. He is the author of The Real Stories of Dinosaurs and Dragons, which you can check out on Amazon.com. I got the Kindle version, and it is great. And this show flew by, and hopefully we can get Philip back on very, very soon to talk a lot more. And Philip, let's get some plugs in. Anything else on the book? And I know you've got a video series and plenty more.
Yeah, so if I would love if you would purchase a copy of the book on Amazon, and if you prefer to check it out for free, let me put in this plug for your local library. And if they don't have it, they probably have interlibrary loan. Check out that at the reference desk. Sure. While we're plugging things, let me plug my employer, Fayetteville State University, one of the least expensive quality universities in North Carolina. Doesn't cost much more than going to a community college, and you get a 4-year degree out of it. And our biology department, my colleagues are so excellent. You'll get a really good forensics education or biology education there. And then, let's see, what else should we plug? How about the Crazy Zoology video series on my YouTube channel, Grumpy Old Grouch? And while we're at it, why not plug the After Dark series? Because I got to say, I like the host. I like the show. Why not let the show plug itself?
I really do appreciate that. Philip J. Center, everybody. The Real Story of Dinosaurs and Dragons. We're going to get him back on again soon. And, of course, thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you next time, After Dark Radio, here on Sports Byline Broadcasting Network.